bottom line is I go to the house. The house is immaculate. Beautiful home on a lake, clean. The sister is a physician's there. And I asked her, I said, where's your sister? She's in the laundry room. I go to the laundry room. She is just sitting there frozen. I spent about an hour and a half talking to the MD, went back. She hadn't moved. An hour and a half. Now, when I say haven't moved, I'm talking about no eye blinks, nothing. That's how significant that was. So it's there. Some of the other symptom requirements, you got to have 3 out of 12. Some of them are stupor, catalepsy. If anybody ever seen anybody with catalepsy, that's an interesting phenomenon where somebody's muscles just give way and they just fall out. You might see this with younger kids with narcolepsy. Mutism, posturing, people just staying frozen in space, like this lady that I evaluated and doing that. Okay, I guess we're going to take if there's a question, and because I think we're going to take a break now.
All right, we're going to take a break. Well, actually, before break, somebody asked about the F at the beginning of the alphanumeric codes, and does that mean mental disorders or something? When I went through and looked on break, the vast majority of the codes in the DSM-5 start with an F. But there are just a handful of them that don't, and those look to me like disorders that people would traditionally think of as physical or medical disorders. So I'm going to say probably the F in ICD language is mental disorder, just by the way things look. The second question is, I was asked for clarification on when exactly is the licensure exam for mental health counselors, which is the NCMHCE, I believe. When is it implementing DSM-5? I think I told you all February, before we went to the break. That's wrong. It's actually April. It's April 2014. So I went and checked. I actually have an email from the board saying that. So hopefully that's really April 2014. Okay, so let's go ahead and pick up with bipolar and related disorders. Not a lot has changed with bipolar disorders. Really, it's essentially the same thing. In criterion A, there was a verbiage change. They are emphasizing that bipolar disorders are just about changes in mood, those mood fluctuations between depression and mania or hypomania. But it's also about changes in activity and energy. So they really wanted to highlight that with that verbiage change. And there used to be a separate ICD-9 code for bipolar disorder mixed episode. And what that did was it made things pretty difficult for a clinician, especially if you have a limited time with a client. You had to figure out, okay, so I know they have both manic and depressive episodes. Do they sometimes have symptoms of both occurring at once? And if so, is it the exact number of symptoms for each that are required for it to be a full-blown episode? And is it therefore a mixed episode? And that could be very time-consuming to figure out. And the clients oftentimes don't know exactly what number of symptoms were occurring at once. So it's really a lot of time spent for very little benefit. What they've now done is, instead of having a separate diagnostic code for a bipolar disorder with a mixed episode, you just have bipolar disorder, and you can add a specifier if you want with mixed features. You don't have to figure out exactly the number of symptoms of each. You just have to know that there are some manic or hypomanic symptoms co-occurring with depressive symptoms, and that's enough for you to add that specifier with mixed features. Makes it all much easier and simpler if you're a diagnostician. I like the change myself. So we have the other specified bipolar-related disorder, and that's, again, getting rid of the NOS, and then you specify why do they not fit into the regular bipolar disorder. We also have a new specifier with anxious distress, and that can be used for if you have somebody with bipolar disorder and they've got some symptoms of anxiety that you want to treat or that you think are important to communicate to whoever is going to be accessing that diagnosis, but they don't necessarily meet diagnostic criteria for a full-blown anxiety disorder. but the anxiety nonetheless is significant and it's important and it needs to be addressed. So you can add that specifier at the end if you choose to. Now, yes?
That with anxious distress,
Uh-huh.
is that only to be used with the bipolar?
Nope. Also will be used for, we're going to get to in a second, with depressive disorders also. So we get two new diagnoses here with depressive disorders. These are some of the more controversial changes with the DSM-5. The first is disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, and the second is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I'm going to go into those. I'm going to go through the diagnostic criteria for those two disorders in just a moment and show them to you. But before we do that, there's another change they made. Dysthymic disorder was like that sort of gray cloud constantly following somebody. It was that mild depressive disorder that was very persistent, lasting 2 years or longer. But then you also had, if somebody had major depressive disorder, and that depressive episode was at least 2 years long, we would call that major depressive disorder chronic. Well, they said, what's the difference between chronic major depressive disorder and dysthymic disorder? Severity, right? That's the only difference really between the two. So they decided, well, this makes sense to take those two, collapse them together into one diagnosis called persistent depressive disorder. It will range in severity from mild to severe. Mild would be dysthymia, and then the moderate to severe would be what used to be that chronic major depressive disorder. So now getting into the controversial stuff, and we're about to show some very specific diagnostic criteria here. So disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. The criticism with this disorder is, oh my gosh, we are now going to pathologize temper tantrums in kids. That's what the fear is. Let's look at the diagnostic criteria. You have to have severe recurrent temper outbursts, manifested verbally, like verbal rages, and or behaviorally, physical aggression towards people or property. They're grossly out of proportion in intensity or duration to the situation or provocation. Got to be inconsistent with the developmental level, what's considered the norm for that age group. And they have to occur on average 3 or more times per week. And the mood between temper outbursts is persistently irritable or angry most of the day, nearly every day, and is observable by others. And those symptoms have got to be present for 12 or more months. During that time, they cannot have a period lasting 3 or more consecutive months without all of the symptoms in criteria A through D. And it's got to be present in at least 2 of 3 settings. Can't just be in one setting that we see these symptoms. It has to be at least a couple settings, like home, school, with peers, on the playground, whatever else. Can't make the diagnosis before age 6 or after age 18. So this is a juvenile-only diagnosis. So here's the situation. The reason why they created persistent depressive disorder is that they found that the kids who had these symptoms, which, this is clinically significant impairment or distress. This is something that needs an intervention. This is something that the children in this diagnostic category are expected to respond to treatment. But what they found is that the kids who met these kinds of symptoms historically have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And it is believed that many of them were misdiagnosed, in part because a large number of them, as adults, would suddenly be healed of their bipolar disorder, and it would no longer exist. The symptoms would be gone. Yes? From intermittent explosive disorder? Well, with this disorder, with intermittent explosive disorder, which is one of the disorders in your section, I guess, my recollection is that these things kind of come out of nowhere, and the person recognizes that this is excessive, and they don't feel like they have a lot of control over them, kind of a thing. This is somebody who's persistently irritable, and it's not kind of it just comes out of nowhere sort of a thing, but they've got this persistent mood going on. That's my understanding, but I don't know.
There's some of that reaction as far
disorders, intermittent explosive disorder is one of the ones that cannot co-occur with this disorder. You have to differentiate between the two. So what they found is, okay, so these kids are often getting mislabeled as bipolar, and then we're treating them with bipolar medications, and as adults, bipolar is not a temporary disorder, it's considered a chronic disorder, so they seem to be misdiagnosed. Their hope is that they would cut down on the number of kids being misdiagnosed and mislabeled. But the controversy is, will clinicians sort of, obviously by the design of the disorder, it's not intended to be your typical temper tantrum. But the fear is, could clinicians be labeling kids with sort of developmentally appropriate temper tantrums with this disorder, and then they're being pathologized? So that's the apprehension about it. So then, full disclosure, I do not have any personal experience with menstruation. And so, in some ways, I am unqualified to talk about that experience. This disorder, first I'm going to walk you through the disorder, and it's very controversial. Then we'll talk about the controversy, the criticism, we'll talk about the defense against the criticism. So what we basically got is, in the majority of menstrual cycles, at least 5 symptoms must be present in the final week before the onset of menses, start to improve within a few days after the onset, and become minimal or absent in the week post-menses. 1 or more of the following symptoms must be present: marked affective lability, mood swings, feeling suddenly sad or tearful, increased sensitivity to rejection, marked irritability or anger, or increased interpersonal conflicts, marked depressed mood, feelings of hopelessness or self-deprecating thoughts, marked anxiety, tension, feelings of being keyed up or on edge. And 1 or more of the following symptoms must additionally be present to reach a total of 5 symptoms when combined with symptoms from criterion B. Decreased interest in unusual activities, that's that anhedonia. I don't find the interest or pleasure in things that I normally would enjoy, a more depressive symptom. That difficulty concentrating, fatigue, lack of energy, changes in appetite, like overeating or specific food cravings, hypersomnia or insomnia, so the sleep cycle gets off, sense of being overwhelmed or out of control, physical symptoms, and symptom criteria A through C must have been met for most menstrual cycles that occurred in the previous year, not just maybe a couple isolated incidents. And it's got to be causing clinically significant impairment or distress, and that's a key phrase when we're looking at mental disorders. Most disorders are based on the idea that it's not just the symptoms, it is the level of impairment and distress that it's causing for the individual in front of you. So, here's the deal. One of the criticisms is we've now pathologized, menstruation. And some, especially female critics, will say, some of this is kind of normal stuff for us to experience, right? So that all makes sense. And when I first, was exposed to, this was in DSM-4, if I recall correctly, it's section 3 or whatever it was to be considered for future revisions or future editions. It was 2 clients of mine who told me on this diagnosis. One client was referred for DUI. The DUI was the only DUI and the only arrest in the person's history. Very high alcohol level. Very high alcohol. I can't remember what it was, but it was really high alcohol level. Doesn't normally drink alcohol at all. Has been Baker acted on a few occasions. Has lost jobs during these episodes. Has had suicidal thoughts, intentions, plans. Has become violent and aggressive when normally a very passive and patient individual. And what she said is, it's only during the period specified in this diagnosis that I experienced these symptoms, never outside of them. Very high functioning, except for during these episodes. But during these episodes, that mood dysregulation is severe enough that we're talking unemployment, we're talking medication with alcohol, alcohol abuse, arrests, violence and aggression, suicidal thoughts and intentions only during these periods. And it was not until she said, I've met with a couple psychiatrists who said, normal women stuff. Felt completely invalidated by that. Found a psychiatrist who said, yes, the data is clear. We are talking about a small subset of women. I think it's like 1% if I remember correctly. We might want to look, or less than that in the DSM because it gives you statistical information. Small subset of women who meet this criteria. And she says, it wasn't until I met with a psychiatrist who knew this is not normal menstrual stuff we're talking about here.